What's up, everybody? Episode 42 of Two FMA-Nerds Talk About Stuff. Today I brought on girl Itsa Shash from the Seattle Balintawak community. He's actually based out of Olympia, Washington, but in these past 3 years, as I've gotten more formally involved with the Balintawak community, he is one of those people that I've really got to know, respect, and appreciate, and he's just one of those beautiful humans that makes the world better. So why not have him on the show and have him share his story? Also with Grow Itsa, he's recently promoted FQI, which is a level 7 fully qualified instructor through GM Bobby Taboada's Balintawak Cuentada system. So basically that means is he can lead his own group and raise students up to level 6. So his promotion ceremony and test was at this year's West Coast camp there in Marysville, and it was cool as fuck. So there's going to be video links to that in the description. But other than that, I'm going to let him tell a story. He has two perspectives when it comes to these concerns about colonization, decolonization, occupation, sovereignty, living with the land, living on the land. I mean, the dude, he's got a great mind, and he's passionate, and I really appreciate what he has to say. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this episode as well. We had a little hiccup with Facebook and Instagram, because why not? But yeah, this is one of those more heady episodes. We covered a lot of great stuff, a little bit about FMA, but we covered a lot of stuff concerning culture, ethnicity, and this messy process of identity, as we often do on this podcast. But overall, I hope you enjoy. I had a great time. I learned stuff. Hopefully you do. Share the page. Do all the stuff for promotions. It would be really helpful. But overall, just hang out. Keep an open mind, because these stories matter. These conversations matter, not just for my own, but for the generations thereafter. So we as instructors have a responsibility to share knowledge, and we also have this responsibility to document knowledge so it can be shared later, like today on this podcast. Anyways, I'm rambling. Whatever. Enjoy the episode. Later. So, Itsa, can you tell us a story of who you are, where you come from, what you do, and all those things, so I can proceed to share this out and attempt to make that work?
Yeah, for sure. Piali, Mibuhay, Nantoka Itsa Shash, Ekakwate Kakwikani. I'm Itsa Shash. That's my name. And I am I identify as Indipino, so like indigenous, Filipino. Those kind of the communities that I'm a part of in my life, and kind of it describes my experience in life. So with a lot of like the indigenous communities that I'm a part of and grew up in, it's kind of protocol that we just talk a little bit about where our grandparents are from. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And, my mom's side, my mother's mother is British German from New York. And then her father is grew up in a little fishing village just outside of Manila, and he was Ifugao, Cebuano. And then my dad's side, both of his parents are from Texas, so they would identify as Tejano, and descended from the tribes in that area, so Nahua people, Chichimeca, and Apache. So that's where my grandparents are from. I was born in Maryland, out by DC area over there, and moved out to Colorado when I was 3 years old. Lived there for most of my life, and most recently, I'm now living in Olympia area, State Shas area, the homelands of Nisqually, Chehalis, and Squaxin peoples over here with my family, my partner Mariana Harvey, and my 2 kids. And yeah, that I've been out in Washington area now for about we moved out here 2012. So yeah, that's a little about where I'm from, who I am. Yeah, what else would you like to know, Kurt?
I mean, so what's great about this podcast is, I mean, we get to tell the stories of the people who make up the FMA community, because it being a Filipino martial arts, or just in general a martial arts podcast, anybody who's pretty much tuned into this, they know martial arts. They know their history of their martial arts. What is more important to me is actually telling the stories of the people who make up the martial arts. Because without the people, martial arts is just, it's a set of curriculum, and just like any other institution, it is the people who make it up, and that's what makes it beautiful, and that's what makes it diverse and unique. So as that, I like to celebrate the stories of the people that's in my community. So and that's why I like origin stories, immigration stories, stories of where one came from and where one's roots are, and what informs their worldview is more important to me. So if you can speak to that, because I mean, I really appreciate actually the tradition and the honoring of your ancestors, because the fact is, without our forefathers and our foremothers, we don't have the privilege to sit here and talk about this stuff today. So I really find that profound when somebody takes a moment to honor them, because again, if we don't know who we are and where we come from, we don't really know who we are today, and we don't know where we're going. And so there's that connection to the past. So yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. I hear that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, the way I always grew up is just common, that's just like what everyone does when they introduce themselves. And yeah, I think for a lot of indigenous communities, really a lot of it's about, what's the right word? There's got to be a word for it, but like, how we're interrelated.
Mm-hmm.
Really a lot about like who we are, and is, identity's not much really in without context.
Yes.
So like really in a lot of ways, who we are is shaped by how we're related to the people around us, and then yeah, of course, what our relationship is with history and our ancestors, and yeah, and the communities we're in relation to in the present as well, right? Yeah.
Because I mean, there is this consistent conversation within, and I find this more and more through this podcast, but also the fact that I'm back into academia once again, is this issue about preservation of culture, living the culture, and thereby creating new culture. Because there's always this dynamic of how far in the past, and considering the concerns of colonialism, because the affect of colonialism is the fact that we get to sit here and talk about it today. And that is somewhat of the privilege of it. So we have to acknowledge that. But when people talk about colonialism and dealing with the issues of the indigenous, is like, how far back do we want to go in that discussion? Because like in the case of, at some point, somebody else conquered someone. At some point, somebody moved from one area to another and took over the land and took control, and they had it for a certain amount of time. So in the fact that this is a Filipino martial arts show, we tend to speak heavily on the concerns of the indigenous pre-colonial and post-colonial life of the modern state of the Philippines. But again, how far back do we want to go? Do we want to go back prior to American occupation, Japanese, American occupation, American Colonialization again, the Spanish occupation, colonialism. Do we want to go back to the Moors? Do we want to, or the Muslims? Do we want to go back to the Dutch, the British, the Indio? I mean, how far back do we want to go? Is the real question here.
Mm-hmm. Like, so I've, you know, because I'm a huge fan of your podcast, and I, you know, I've heard you talk about this in with a lot of other people, and the way I've heard you frame it before, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but you've asked this question in regards to like how far back do we go, but in regard to decolonization, right? And because yeah, if we're just talking about to understand colonialism, how far back do we go? I don't know. But if we're talking about in the terms of decolonization, that's something just a little bit different. I like to be really specific about my semantics. What I'm talking about. It's like one of the values.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So like, anyway, if we're talking about decolonization, I think for me, really, it's not about going back.
Okay.
You know, and the reason why I say that is because if you think about, you know, first you have to describe what we're talking about. We have to understand what colonization is, because a lot of people have different ideas of what colonization can be, right? Throw on words around that. People talk about colonization like the colonizing of your gut when you're born, right? And I throw those in because I'm also a health nerd, right? That's part of my but like, so what I'm talking about when I say colonization is the control of an area, of a territory, of land, of people, of an ecosystem there, and for the purposes of exploitation.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Right. So if we think about that's what colonization is, like, okay, what is the opposite of colonization? It's not decolonization. The opposite is sovereignty.
Okay. I like how that's okay.
Right. Because what you're looking for is you're looking for yourself for your own autonomy, right? Your own self-determination, right? And freedom to basically, you know, have some control over your own way that you want to go, right? And I say that as a community because, like, also in the U.S. modern society that we live in under colonization, there is a heavy emphasis on this idea of individual freedom, right, and individual autonomy, and this thing, and you know, that's good. And I feel like as individuals, like, there's no such thing as us as individuals. Like, how would you say? I don't exist as an individual, right? Like, even inside of me, if we go back to the colonization of the gut, like most of the DNA and beings in my body wouldn't even be considered human. It's like, at what point am I not part of something else, right? So part of everything. And indigenous people are very integrated with land and the ecosystems around them, right? And there is that connection. So, like, really, I like to think about, there's no, like, yes, I want my own autonomy, but it's always a balance between my own morals and then also moving together with my communities that I'm with, right? We want to exercise autonomy, sovereignty, moving forward together as on a community level.
Okay.
Right? That's the way, I think about it. So in a sense, like, the Philippines is a product of decolonization.
Okay.
Right? I mean, see that?
When you put it in that terms, because talk about human systems, because we, as you described it, is we're or a system or a biological system. And as a result of it, we have human systems and institutions that's an extension of that, the extension of the intellect, the personality, the overall being that is the individual, made up of many other things that are connected. And I also appreciate like the defining and the semantics, because again, what this podcast allows me to do is like talk about the questions that a young individual has when it comes to this mindset, because there's a lot of resentment, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of fear, and at some point we all go through that anyways. But eventually, hopefully, we get to the other end of enlightenment and saying, okay, accept, acknowledge, remember, never forget. Some of us forgive, some of us don't, but a lot of that comes to the understanding of guiding us and mentoring our way through the effect of the great death of culture. But we also create new culture as a result of it. Again, the dynamic of preservation and creation, and thereby new. So defining the semantics of colonization versus decolonization as occupation and liberation or sovereignty or individual freedoms, those terms give power and a whole different weight of responsibility, for one, and it sheds new light on the perspective of what we are. Because again, we are what we think, we are what we perceive. And so when we change our viewpoints on it, there's a certain amount of liberty and liberation, but also it can be resentful and limiting. And again, this whole like defeatist mindset that comes from when you look through the filter of negativity and look through the filter of anger and resentment. And I find with a lot of youth within our community and spaces, when talking about these subjects, they're stuck in that same single data point of anger, resentment, and fear, but haven't had the mentorship moving forward to figure out like, hey, there is a way to do this. There's a way to still talk about this intellectually, but purposefully with a positive outcome. And I find that it comes from education. So, and this is where we talk about, again, the semantics, the processes of where we come from and what we're doing to get there, and then acknowledging what we're doing in the present with the goals of the future.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, there's a couple different points in there, I guess, that are resonating with me. And I know I kind of want to touch on this anger bit.
Yeah.
Because I don't know a whole lot about, like, I've listened to your journey a little bit on some of the other podcasts. I don't know all the details, but I do know that in your personal journey, it sounds like anger has been a very defining thing in your life.
Yeah, it has. Yeah,
you've had, and I imagine, you know, having kids now too, like that's something you're like thinking about, and I feel a lot of love coming from your questions and like looking out the community and being like, how do we help these guys? And I'm seeing people that are angry, you know. And first, I want to be careful about this question, because there is that stereotype that we all are aware of like angry brown people.
Yeah, I mean, thus the Angry Brown Man was my nickname for many, many years. So yeah.
Yeah. So I want to first say that, you know, like the whole angry, that's not my experience, right? Like if I think about like decolonization I could say that like it's a tool that I use daily, right? And throughout my life, and was a huge part of my parents' journey. And like, I'm pretty sure anyone who talked about me would like be like, Itsa's not a very angry person. And
no, that's one of the things that I really enjoy about you, is you're a very kind soul. Like you embody this level of grace and tranquility and peace, and it's inspiring is what it is, honestly. So yeah.
And you know, and if anything, I'd say, you know, that's maybe testament to my parents, my community where I come from, who are also that kind of work and working towards, you know, self-determination, those things. And they're just great people. Like I could take you back home to some of the ceremonies and stuff, and you know, it's just like that loving nature kapwa, right?
Yeah.
That's what I feel, right? So I just wanted to say that, and then also not like invalidate that, there are people that we have in our communities that might feel, anger, and that's understandable. Like, that's one is, I feel like, especially having kids this time around, because I've had kids throughout my life, as far as like other people's kids and being an older uncle, whatever. But like this time around, being with my kids, right? Like, I've seen a lot of nuances to things that I haven't noticed before. In our Nahua cosmology, we're really big on the numbers 4 and 13. And we talk about like the development of a human being in kind of roughly that timeline. And I see a lot of things happen in my kids, like when specifically when they start getting to like around the age 3 going into 4, like I saw a lot of this emotional development in my child, right, where they start experiencing fear and anger and these things, but they don't have the tools to understand all of this, right? And lots of times have to kind of give them space and just be like, try to be like a grounding, regulating force, and be like, hey, these are feelings. This is normal. Like, I feel that you're feeling this way. I see that so you're okay, right? Like, you're safe here, right? And I the way I understand it is that doesn't end, right? Like, even us, when we go through this time, when we turn 13, if I'm going into cycles of 13 now, or 26, right? Like, there are these natural times in our life when we go through these developmental things, when we're going to be challenged with some of these developmental things, and the emotions are going to come back, and we're going to feel, if we want to go into Western science, all the hormones and things that go through our body and like are going to affect us in an emotional, physical way. And sometimes, especially if we don't have like community to hold us, right, then that can be more difficult to manage. And so like so I would say that it also makes me think, like, how has the modern society we live in, colonization, affected our relationship with anger in particular, right?
Yep. Because there's that stereotype of the angry brown man, the angry indigenous.
Yes. And if we go back to, like, say, my dad's generation, I even got it a little bit, growing up, but it was like anger in some ways was the only emotion that's kind of allowed. Like, you definitely weren't allowed to cry.
Yeah, because anger is another form of fear. I mean, it's the aggressive response of fear.
It could be that. It could be that. I feel like once we get to more our generation, there's also like that thing where it's like, in general, men are allowed to be angry, but like now it's like, for a lot of brown people, it's almost like not safe. It's not okay. If I see, like, I don't know. I mean, if kids are angry in general in public, like, might not be okay. But if you see Black kid angry in public, it might be more not okay, right?
Yeah,
But it's the way I've seen it, right? So it's like there's that, and then there's the stereotype that we get placed into and all that, and our parents want to protect us from that sometimes, and as a result, it can make it feel like it's not okay to be angry.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is where, like, the adjusting and reframing and repurposing that anger again, turning pain into passion to find purpose and peace, that whole bunch of P's. But you could still be angry. It's the whole, like, the Hulk aspect of like I'm always angry, but I can do something about it. Anger can be the initiation or that inciting thing, but you got to do something with it. Again, it's the trauma kindling, that's that fuel. But again, starting from anger isn't necessarily the greatest place to start at, and this is where I find the other end of anger is love. Like I do these things because I love it. Because if I'm doing it out of anger, it's a fear in my mind. It's a fear response of I do not want to feel weak. I'm afraid of being taken advantage. I'm afraid of this, that, and the other, and so I'm going to match it with anger and aggression and assault forward. Versus now in this other enlightenment where I don't have a lot of things to prove. I don't have a chip on my shoulder, so to speak. It's just I do the stuff because I love the stuff, and I've been there, done that kind of thing.
Yeah. I can relate to that. What I really liked about that is the way you said, like, I'm angry because, right? And it's like, yeah, I'm angry because I have fear, right? I'm angry because lots of times when I get angry personally, it's because I feel, I feel, how would you say, wounded.
Yeah. Or guilty. That's another one too.
Guilty. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, could be you, right? Like, and I like that there's all these emotions underneath it usually, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
things. And sometimes it's that digging in deeper and being like, okay, what are all these other emotions, things going on in here? And then like, and what do I need? Right?
Yeah, because that angry young man, I mean, there's a lot of things that angry young man needs to become that more functional current adult, leading to that enlightened fatherly uncle, like paternal figure. And you mentioned that going back to is tribe and community, because a lot of the anger and resentment that I find within this community of people talking about decolonization, this younger community, is they have a disconnect from where they come from, and they have a resentment because their parenting structure, one, just stepped away from it completely, didn't teach it to their children, like teaching their language, teaching their customs. So they're caught in the middle of like, what are you? Are you really an American? Are you really Filipino? All these questions about enough. And it ties back to that issue of tribe, community, kapwa, and those who are disconnected from it. It's resentment and fear, and then leads to anger as a result. So, and again, having the upbringing of a strong sense of culture, in your case, a multi-ethnic, multiculture, that's really important because you have respect and honor and connection to both. And you have that present mindset of, because of where I came from, this is who I am today, and this is where I'm going with it, and perpetuating that to the next generation. But for people who are disconnected, it's a messy process.
Yeah. You know, it can be, you know, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think it's something probably we've all struggled with in some form or another, right? Like, it's kind of the, you know, in general, like, I'm not a fan of like colonization just because like the exploitation aspect. But you know, I am a huge fan of like solidarity and just thinking about like the beauty of all these cultures that have been brought into this colonial project. And in some ways it's like there's that hardship in it where like you you know, you get this, there's it's very easy to get disconnected, right? You know, on all sides, right? Like even in my British German side, like it's interesting to me how much easier it is sometimes even for like Caucasian identity to just be washed away completely.
Right? Yeah, because that's an interesting point, because talking to Lilo Marfil, I had him on the podcast a couple of months ago, and I didn't actually know that he's half Irish.
Mm.
He's not full Filipino, and he was talking about touching those indigenous roots so he has proper representation of the both. And I look at that also with the rest of the mestizos, like my children who are German Irish, or no, German English and Filipino, because there's that question of we're very Filipino in a lot of ways, like Phil am Filipino, but we don't talk about a lot of like the German English ancestry on my wife's side. But I mean, part of that is because my wife's family hasn't been German and English for since the 1820s, no, 1860s. So like there is no German connection whatsoever other than name and location and the last name, but nobody speaks German within 3 generations. Nobody practices any of the customs. They're very American, and I find that with a lot of people who have that mixed ethnic background is like if one's very present, it dominates the space, and it's not because it's better. It's just like the lived-in experiences and practices. Because the questions being of what cultural identity is, I often bring up what is a Filipino, but the other side of that is what's an American.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's where I see a lot of things get, like I said, overshadowed. And as you're saying, where the Caucasian community, especially in America, their ethnic cultural backgrounds aren't celebrated and practiced because one, disconnect from time and lived in experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, I think a lot of it is the time, right? The separation time that rings true. Yeah, and the lived in experience, right? Like I don't identify like hugely with being German because it's just like there's no community out here that like I feel connected to. But like I don't ignore it at all either, you know, like for sure, like I just found this German diner that's like super legit German food. This grandma in there is just like makes everything from scratch.
Nice.
And I was in there, I was like feeling in my bones, like I like this is somewhere, you know. So yeah, you know, it's nice to feel that to be connected in whatever ways that they can come up sometimes, you know. Feels good myself. Mm-hmm. I was gonna ask you, because you're in school again right now, and
yeah, I'm in my master's program.
what are you getting your master's in?
So I screwed around the first 3 times when I went to school trying to figure out like when I grow up I could be this. Like I'm still trying to figure that out. So I started out actually as an English major, found out that I couldn't finish that program here locally, so I switched over to education, did that remotely. And then from there I've moved to the history department this time around. But now as I move into my master's program, it is it's an MLA technically, but it's a multidisciplinary program where I'm creating my own program. So the center of it is utilizing cultural institutions and culture bearers as a means to connect and bridge between this dynamic between preservation, living, and creating new culture, and how that those experiences help define these multiple identities that people of ethnicity deal with. Like say in the Filipino diaspora, we have our regional connection, and whether or not we're Cebuano, Ilonggo, Tagalog, et cetera. Then you have the Filipino national identity. If you've immigrated to the U.S., you have Phil-Am identity, and also as living in the U.S., you have your American national identity, and then you have all your subsets. So you have all these hats that you're juggling, and you have all these perspectives and viewpoints that you're juggling, and it leads to a lot of this confusion as to what am I and am I enough? When the answer is you are whatever you are and whatever you choose to be, and you are enough because you are. And that goes back to this issue about guiding the younger generation and help them find that enlightenment for the future. So my program involves history, involves philosophy, involves psychology, dealing with like the somatic and psychological healing aspects. And then I add some of the English or the creative writing aspect, because there's a lot of the philosophy that comes out, a lot of the healing comes out in art and the poetry and the writings of people who are journaling this stuff, like the writings of Peter Cotazal and his meditations upon nationalism and reclaiming and defining are fascinating. And then on top of all that, using a physical institution or community to help spread that out. And this is where it comes down to Filipino martial arts. Filipino martial arts, I find, is a cultural institution that holds lineage and bridges between the old, the current, and the new. And you find that community there, that kapwa, and it's very open to everybody, because we all love FMA if we're in FMA. It doesn't matter where you come from. We're just here to swing sticks, swing swords, and swing and poke people with knives, and we all love it. And that is a beautiful culture that brings in everybody, but has connections again to those three points in time. So yeah, that's basically what my master's program is about.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it sounds like you found a purpose and a vision of like where you're going, and that's like bigger than yourself and really tied into where you come from, and like is tied into like the future of our communities as a whole in humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of vision is like so important for everybody to have in life. Like it's really so yeah, I think you're really onto something there. I think that's great. And yeah, and then because this is an FMA podcast, going back to what you said with FMA, yeah, absolutely. I think if I had a nickel for every time I heard a Filipino student talk about how they just felt drawn to FMA because it was like part of their culture, and it was like,
oh yeah,
or that opened them and brought them back, right?
Yeah.
And that was my experience for sure, like with it, because I got way more connected with my Filipino side when I moved to Washington.
Yeah, there's a huge Phil-Am community there. I love it.
Yeah, because a lot of the people out here, like Ilocano and Ifugao, Cebuano, but like my experience was very different than a lot of the people out here, because like a lot of the people out here, they moved with the agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
fishing canneries, whatever was they're coming out through with their whole families, and so like my grandpa, he fled the Philippines during World War II.
Yeah.
Because he was living up by Manila, and during the Japanese occupation, and their village got bombed, had they were living in caves for a while. Mm-hmm. Like so pretty much all of his family died. And he fled to New York, and was kind of more along that lines of like war trauma, like we don't talk. I'm not going to tell you about anything that happened back there.
Yeah.
And he'd be like, "Grandpa, teach me some Tagalog," and be like, "Oh, I don't even remember anymore." And then you pick up the phone and be talking to someone in Tagalog and be like,
and that's what I'm talking about, when people who the first generation who's trying to be the new thing because of the trauma of the past and the adoption of the current culture to integrate. I mean, that's it right there.
Yeah. So, and then growing up myself in Colorado, there just wasn't any Filipinos around.
No.
And then so yeah, it was I first got introduced to FMA when I was actually at a ceremony on the East Coast, because I was born on the East Coast, and we had family ties with the Piscataway Nation out there, the Tayak family. and they would do a ceremony out there. My dad was fire chief, and so we'd go there like every year when I was from the time I was a little kid. And there was some special forces guys that were training with one of the people in our community, and they were teaching them how to make primitive weapons, so that, like, you know, if they got stranded and were lost in some place, they could make knives and stuff out of rocks and whatnot.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so you know, this small group of guys were there, and you know, of course, us being little kids, we're like, who are these ninja guys, you know, and they're training, and everything they were doing was empty-handed. There was no stick, right? But like they would let us go in there and play with them a little bit and like watch them, and then and they were like, yeah, they called it this is Filipino stick fighting, is what they said, right? And I don't know what system they were doing to this day or whatever, but that was my first thing, and I was like, oh, like, we have some kind of fighting thing back there, right? And I liked that, and then but really I never got involved with it until years later, my early 20s, when I was interning with my kinesiology teacher, studying kinesiology, the science of movement, but then also you know, traditional Chinese medicine. And part of that is he started he found out I was Filipino, and we had been doing like Tai Chi and stuff. And then he was like, oh, well, you should learn Eskrima then, you know, you should learn Arnis, is what he said. And because he was a combatant teacher.
Okay, cool.
Ernesto Prisus, right? And then everything switched. He started showing me videos of like when he went and used to visit with Ernesto Prisus, and like Ernesto's climbing on top of him, giving him massage and like stuff, right? And I was like, okay, yeah, these grandmasters are like healers too, right? And they're like, oh, they're working on him, and then he would like show me videos of Remy doing all of his locks and whatnot, but like purposes of healing, though, he'd be like, check out this guy's knowledge of the joints and the way they move. And I just thought that was so cool. And then, you know, I trained with him combatant for a couple years, but you know, I didn't gain any rank or anything. It was just part of the experience of my studies, you know. Yeah, and then when my partner, we met out there around that same time and started dating, and I came out to Washington to visit her family. And I was like, well, there's a lot of Filipinos out there. Like, while I'm visiting, I should just see what's around, you know? And so like I started Googling, and I came across Balintawak, Seattle, you know, and it was like Guru John teaching out of the Filipino Community Center. And I was like, okay, this guy must be legit because he's teaching out of the community center, right? So then I looked him up, and Bobby, and I started reading the history, and saw that how like Balintawak was one of the main arts that was like a foundation in Kombatan, right?
And for the and for our online community who's just watching this, who's not an FMA practitioner, the Seattle, like Pac Northwest community in general, is so much FMA. If you're looking for FMA on the West Coast, aside from going to California, go to the Seattle area. There's so much FMA there. It is the scene in my mind in the Pac Northwest. So, anyways,
yeah, I agree. It wasn't like that when I first got there, but blown up for sure. Yeah, I like it. You know, yeah, you know, testament to Bobby Taboada, and just it's like got to be the most prolific producer of screamadors in the world right now, I think. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and just friendly, right? And just like really welcoming of everybody. And so and then of course, you know, Guru John, and yeah, everything he's done same way in the Northwest here. And so yeah, so you know, I found him, and I found that connection, and you know, met up with John, and he thought I was gonna leave. He's like, who's this guy? You know, he's like, because you know, I wasn't sure if I was gonna stay either, because it was just visiting, and he showed me 12 basic strikes and 12 strikes in control, and but I went back to Colorado and I just learned all of it and trained on my own for like a year, and then we had eventually decided to move out to Washington. And
nice.
Yeah, so then we moved out, and I reconnected, and the rest is history. Just stuck with it. You know, I just love that community. I feel like I really hit the jackpot with Balintawak Seattle community. You know, there is a lot of FMA communities, and I'm sure they're all great. You know, but I don't know. The vibe of just Balintawak Seattle. It you know, I do love, you know, to swing around sticks and poke knives and all the rest, but like, you know, there's nuances to all of that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I vibe better in general with the people who like to swing sticks over the people who are really quick to want to pick up a pointy knife.
I agree, and I can appreciate that, because the whole vibe is very different. I mean, part of it, again, the testament to GM Bobby, and by extension his cadre of FQIs and COAs, that's fully qualified instructors in completion of the arts practitioners, so level 6 and 7s for our audience here. But it is by extension of the, like I said, leadership and example of GM Bobby and all of his cadre of saying, it's not a fight. This is fun. This is play. This is culture. This is love. This is not about a fight. If I mean, what is what GM Bobby says? If it's fighting, it's killing, or something to that effect. That could be. I mean, that's what I've gathered from him. I didn't
hear him say it. This is not a fight all the time. Like he's really good at like trying to drill that into people. Like, don't take this or yourself too seriously.
Right? And as a result of that, the focus there is Balintawak, I find, is a martial arts community. It's not a combat arts. It's our combat systems, not a killing community, because it is focused on the play, the drilling, that aspect. People have the freedom to enjoy, to explore, make mistakes, and build that community of care, versus like some of the other FMA systems, say like PTK and some of the other like military specific systems. It's a whole cultural shift. It's a whole like different perspective and viewpoint of how do we address this subject matter and what is the end result and functionality. Because again, there's the online comment section argument of like, when am I ever going to pick up a stick? I'll have my knife, and that whole thing within the martial military community. But again, one's connected to the other. But what I find still is that the edged weapons community, they're still focused on the killing aspect, the combat aspect, because there's the direct application for military and law enforcement. And so there's that perspective and viewpoint and culture specific to that. Balintawak and other stick-based systems, but specifically from my experience, Balintawak, because it is focused not on killing, it's focused on the community, the play, the fun, the skills development. It's a whole different dynamic of like the people who are in Balintawak versus people who are in the bladed systems.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Not sure how have a whole lot more to add on to that, except like, I agree. Right.
Well, I mean, the thing that I find also, like I've watched 3 FQI tests now, just having been introduced physically into the Balintawak community and actually been present there these past 3 years, is that there is so much opportunity for self-expression after you've made the curriculum by adding your own unique flair specific to you and your own individual strikes, cultural influence. And so GM Bobby encourages that self-expression after the fact, and you get to see so many different personalities. I mean, like everything from Guru Belton's grappling Muay Thai, then you see some of the Sealot and trapping with other people. You see Muay Thai with Guru Jeff, Guru John with his boxing. I mean, you see a bunch of stuff throughout there. And just like with yourself, with your own FQI test, with the shield, and I'm going to butcher the name of this, the Moctalil.
Makwawit.
Makwali.
Yeah.
Okay. So for those who don't know what that is, you want to explain what that is?
Yeah. So the Makwawit is a Mesoamerican uh, pre-Spanish weapon, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was used. I have it right here, actually.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
For those who don't know, and it was in the video that put up from Itsa's Instagram, is he did a few of his own unique, his specific techniques. Actually, for the FQI test, one of the requirements is to do your own techniques to add to the curriculum, and so he chose to bring stuff from his other indigenous background, and this weapon is part of that, and it was really cool to watch. So, anyways,
Yeah. So this is Makwawit. My cousin made this, right?
mm-hmm.
So yeah, they're not used anymore, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, but yeah, it's kind of like a lot of indigenous cultures have like these paddle-like instruments, right? I mean,
Yeah. Yep.
we got what do they call the gotok blades? They were kind of like ones that were originally pointed, but then they chopped off the end. I think it had to do something with Spanish permitting pointy ends or something. But anyway, Makwawit, yeah, it's like this, and then the ends here were lined with obsidian, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obsidian is a volcanic rock that's super sharp. They actually still use obsidian blades today in like modern medical hospitals for surgeries and stuff because the blade is sharper than steel, right? So it's better for those kind of cuttings. So it's a very interesting weapon, I thought, because like if you think about it, it's if you use it correctly, it's like way sharper than steel. They have accounts of like warriors splitting horses' heads like in half when they were encountering the Spanish with the weapon and stuff. But then on the other end, if it's used wrong, it can shatter like glass, right? There's no one that I know of that still has like a lineage of traditional fighting arts of like how to use this. If anyone's out there who like knows someone who has some kind of unbroken or even not unbroken, just some kind of further study, I'm always looking for that more. In my own studies of this, I wanted to kind of like interpret just my understanding of it through Balintawak. And that was a really fun project for me, for sure. Kind of some of the ways that we don't know about, like how we would use when we're talking like military tactics, like in a group setting, right? Because there's kind of two accounts that we see this used. One would be military tactics in group setting, to which we know like the primary weapon would have been more like spear throwers, things like that, but then the end of when you get in closer, this is more be like your close range weapon that you're using with the shield. And the goal would be not to kill your enemy. Your goal is to maim them. So they're not used. So I kind of tried to think about that, like how to incorporate it just to attacking the legs, arms, things, so that they wouldn't be able to fight back. And which I kind of again goes. I really like to think about techniques where we're not actually having to kill people. I think that's a great place for skilled martial artists to go to. Yeah, so that's a little bit about the Makwawit. Fun fact: how like they say the cliche would be like Inuit people have, I don't know, a dozen names for snow or something like that, and I think our people had something like 7 names for people with their nose cut off. So I'm like, okay. Yeah, so anyway, fun fact.
I mean, that's a funny part about language is language informs our personality, our philosophy, our outlook and culture, but also the way we engage with the community and our environment also encourages the influence of our language. So, like you said, with native peoples up here, yeah, snow is a big one. And I mean, taking people's noses. I haven't heard that before. That's hilarious.
I'm really fascinated by pre-European um, fighting, right? Because
Mhm.
like I think a lot of us think about going back to the colonization thing, just like of that in terms of what happened of like Europeans
Mhm.
to us, and there's definitely some exploitation that happens amongst tribes with each other,
Yeah.
and then there's also nuances. Like I feel like some cultures had certain kinds of cultures where they were kind of in these like understandings of raids with each others, or had different rules of combat in a sense of like the way that they would do wars with each other.
Yeah. Ritual versus total war. Yep.
Yeah, and that's just seemed like, I don't know, maybe a little more nuanced, balanced way of doing it than just like conquering people and exploiting them or however. But yeah, and then like there's some tribes up north. The classic example that I always grew up with was like the coup stick, amongst a lot of like Lakota people, where they go into battles and like count coup on people, where they use these sticks and they would like tag people, maybe take a braid or something, but there wasn't like actually any death
Yeah.
happening. So yeah, I'm a little fascinated about that kind of stuff, but then yeah, and then yeah, and then just the our role with particularly a lot in my lineage, it's I think it's something we have to acknowledge that a lot of us don't want to, is like been our role in assisting with colonization.
Oh yeah, because like people, for the case of the Philippines, for Filipino history, that's not often taught because of the narrative of what people are trying to put forth about this issue about uh, evil colonization, evil conquerors, this and such. But the fact is, part of the conquest came at the behest of one tribe treating with the conquistadors, being trading golds and guns and equipment, and telling and in support of the Spaniards and raiding other tribes because there was already warfare amongst the tribes. So it wasn't just like, oh, showing up and everybody's being conquered. That's
Right.
not how things occur. And that's the same with every indigenous nation. There was always collaborators that assist with the incoming force. It's just a universal human principle when it comes to warfare. So
Right. And like our on our Nahua side, like I don't know in detail exactly all the tribes that, because Nahua's like not just one tribe. There's a lot of Nahua tribes. If you, depending on how far back you go, right?
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? So like but the most people that are um detribalized, or however have some kind of ancestry from the Tlaxcalans,
Mm.
right? Were the tribe that um really allied heavily with the Spanish and came up north into like Colorado, and were actually also very heavily present in the Philippines,
Hmm.
right? Because like when the Spanish went over there, like the Tlaxcalans were their guys. Like they brought them all over the place, and like there's a lot of language that ended up in the Philippines from Nahuatl, right?
Oh.
Like and maybe there's someone linguistically here who will totally say that this is myth, and I am always happy to be wrong if this is not true. But the way I heard it, right, is that like the word for mom and dad, right?
Nana
Tata,
and Tatay. Yeah.
yeah, right. In Nahuatl, it's tata nana. Okay, although you would say sin on the end because you always talk to your parents respectfully, so you say nansin tatsin. But if you take that respectful away, that's the word, right? So yeah, I would be curious to look into that a little more, like if there are other, you know, words, or if that one is just straight up Nahua word that comes from there. But I thought it would be interesting that like such an important word in the language difference comes from Nahuatl. Like that's really would be something interesting, right? And
and for the sake of our audience who are not familiar with the native tribes of the United States, because people hear the names, but they don't make association as to the locations here in the continental U.S. So could you explain where the Nahua people are located in pre-colonial times and still and today?
Yeah. So again, it depends on how far back you go, but you know, because our people did move around quite a bit, but they're mostly associated with like central Mexico up through the southern United States.
Okay.
Yeah, that kind of territory in there. And yeah, and then they, you know, more so I'd say they're more present in the north now than like right before the Spanish showed up, right? Because the Spanish took them everywhere. Yeah, we have, you know, Calpulis up here in Washington now. Calpuli is like a group of families that travel together, hold their culture together and everything, right? Okay. So yeah, we can find those like all over the country. Yeah, I'm like also like creating this little list of like things that are like very Indipino to me. One of them is like mezcal, which is an alcohol drink, but it's made from an agave cactus down in Mexico. But the process of how they made it came from the Philippines. Yeah, because the Filipinos came over and they were using palm oil, I believe, was to make a palm wine, and the Spanish outlawed it and cut down all the trees over there, and so then they started using agave, and they were like, okay, mezcal, right? Yeah. Anyway, those cultural mixings are fascinating to me, you know.
Yeah, because I mean, if we look through the past of the path of which the Spanish went westwards in the pursuit of gold and routes to Japan and Southeast Asia, and finding things along the way, not to mention like trying to find a route faster than going around the tip of South America. I mean, they end up in the Caribbean, they end up in Brazil, Argentina, central Mexico, and keep moving westward. So as a process of that time, they're going to pick up indigenous peoples and bring them wherever they go, and the customs and traditions and stuff of effect, bring it to their newest place of conquest and colonization. And then as part of the empire, it's stuff that's going to travel back and forth. Like, again, the process of distillery. I just watched a video about that actually here recently. And also, again, languages. And on top of all that, martial culture, martial arts. Because, like, there's this debate that constantly comes up within the community. And this is the issue about history and education of, like, how much influence did the Spaniards have on Filipino martial arts? The answer is a whole lot, because again, if you look at our language structure, we wouldn't be called Filipinos without the Spaniards. There's a lot of argument that like the dueling culture of typical of FMA, especially with daga y espada, I mean, that's Spanish rapier and paring dagger, just straight up. Now, the influence and change because of occupational situations is the indigenous figure out how to make things work with the tools that are available to them. So you see the pairing of the baston and the daga to meet some of the requirements of the daga y espada, because again, a long sword and a paring dagger is expensive. And so with these indigenous tribal peoples, they have a long knife and a stick that they can adopt practices within. the Spanish martial approach to things and utilize it within the tools that they have. And not to mention, like, there was the Spanish missions based out of Manila and Cebu, where they were training regiments of native peoples to help with the occupation and war fighting within the Philippines itself. I mean, you see these native contingent corps all over the place with every colonized location, whether it's the British, the Spaniards, the Dutch, etc. There's always a native contingent that's trained and integrated into the colonizers, the military of the colonies. So with that, there's the influence of Spanish military practices into FMA, and this is where we see a lot of that today. So I'm just really curious with the lack of integration of, say, like the indigenous weapons from Latin America. How come that didn't make it into Spanish usage? Part of it is also technology. So
yeah. I wonder about that. You know, the interesting thing, going back to the Makwawit, right? Not only was it not integrated, it was intentionally destroyed.
Yeah, because
right?
you destroy that, you destroy the culture and create new culture. Yep.
Yeah, like there is not a single ancient Makwawit that you can find in existence. Like literally every single one. There's like, the only way that we know what they look like is from codices, right? Our old books, because we had books stuff when the Spanish showed up, and there's like drawings in there of like what they looked like, and some of the old dances and stuff, and that's a lot of like where I drew a lot of my inspiration from, of like, okay, there's these couple stances that we see these people in these pictures from way before, but like there's to my knowledge, and there's not any of them that are around. So yeah, it's definitely I don't understand it all, a lot more. Like what they choose to hold on to certain things and then get rid of others,
I mean, the fact is, when you colonize a location, part of the process of colonization is destruction of the language, destruction of the tribal customs and belief systems, and conversion, and then also destruction of the military apparatus. So you go after the warriors, go after the priests, go after the language culture bearers, and thereby create a new culture of within the liking and needs of the incoming occupiers.
Yeah.
So when you lose like the weapons specific, you're destroying their martial culture that helped literally defend the culture. So take away their tools, take away their sense of identity, take away their purpose, allow them to take over.
Yeah, I guess you're touching on something I just never thought about before, because if we think about Tlaxcalans, right, and going, and because if I'm the Spanish, and what the Spanish are very good at doing, as we described, is exploiting tribal warfare, right? Like, because a lot of times we had these different wars. Sometimes our wars amongst each other were just straight up colonization and self-exploiting people and territories, and sometimes there was more nuance. But either way, the Spanish knew how to exploit that to like for their own benefit, right? But if you were to do that, if you think about being like Spanish going into an area, if there's only a few of you, it doesn't always make a lot of sense to like try to provide all of these guys with rapiers and armor and guns. What probably makes sense is be like, okay, who are your warriors who can fight? And
you use the weapons that they have.
So. They have, right? Because they're trained in all of that. And like, but I guess you'd think that some of those would have survived. But I don't know. I would, if I had to make a guess, I would say maybe it has to do with the church, honestly, just like being like, okay, now you're one of us at this point, after things are kind of fought and under control, got to give up your ways or whatever, and then maybe there's mass burning. I don't know. This is all speculation at this point, but something I haven't thought too deeply about.
I mean, it's a fun area to explore because, again, these hypothetical conversations helps for an area of discovery. And my hope with, again, a lot of these conversations is it'll help inspire somebody to go forth and seek this information out and hopefully share it with the rest of the community, because I mean there's ripples and effect of everything that we do. So yeah, if somebody in the audience or knows somebody, and if you have better understandings of history than the both of us, reach out, do this stuff, because I would love to learn, and so would the rest of the community. I don't know if you can see this map on your screen, but is this a better map to describe where the Nahua people would be in Mesoamerica? I don't have ones leading into the
Yeah,
Southwest.
and again, it depends on how far back you go, right?
Yeah.
So like that looks like a good map of like where you would see a lot of Nahuatl speakers today, I would say, right? And it's a huge language family. Like we have close to, I think, close to like 2 million fluent speakers now, which is like huge for an indigenous language in the Americas. You know, that being said, like if you looked at like where Nahuatl people are now, it's spread a lot, right? Like we're all over the place. And if you go back before, like further back, if you look at like the Udo-Aztecan language family, right, then you start to see like the path that we've traveled down, because like in those books that I was talking about, we have a history, and Mexico City's probably right there by those stars, right? I think we were only there for like, well, not all the Nahua group, but the Mexica group in particular was only there for like 300 years before the Spanish showed up.
Yeah.
And then they had come from the north. So like there's a whole trail of like other families that are connected to the language. So like if we looked at like the Philippines, right? There's all the language groups. Yeah, see? So yeah, so that's I would say that map looks maybe a little too big.
Yeah. Oh, right. I mean, what it's showing is the migration of native language speakers and influence moving out. But there's also like total nerd here, philology nerd, is there's a lot of conversation about how native languages from the Bering, the land bridge from Asia to Alaska and moving down as peoples go, because there's multiple migrations of any peoples coming to the Americas and any other place. And there's a lot of linguistic markers that we see coming from Southeast Asia, but we're also seeing it following the Navajo language family groups all the way down to, say, like the tip of Argentina and Chile. And so with that, there is a, depending on time, it's going to go back up as well in influence. So it is interesting, again, the influence of time and traveling of peoples.
This would be probably like the equivalent of what we're looking at right now to like modern Nahuatl, like to the, say, Austronesian language family.
Yeah.
We're looking at that, right? Which again, you know, I'm all about solidarity. So like, you know, thinking about all those tribes up and down, like being related, and same in the out there by the islands and Pacific all the way to Africa, right? There's Austronesian group out in Madagascar, I believe.
Yeah, that's our lateral migration of peoples and genetics coming from Madagascar coming eastward, but we also have the Indio language cultural systems coming from the Indus Valley going to Indochina. So it's Thailand, Taiwan, no, Thailand, Burma, Vietnam, and then going through the My Lai with the Srivijaya and the Majapahit lineages and so on and so forth. Plus, you have the Muslim connection, then you have the Taiwanese coming south. I mean, there's so much sea travel going eastwardly on the map. There's, again, the Philippines. I liken the Philippines when it comes to this idea of grouping people together for simplicity's sake, because people, they generalize because it's easier typically, because they generalize with that because they don't want to talk about the semantics and the individual issues. But when we talk about individual issues and being specific, we have to break down what part. Because the thing I look at with the Philippines, like Native Americans, it's a bunch of different kingdoms and polities and nation states that were thrown together underneath a modern nation state. So we have such a diversity throughout the Philippines as we do here in the Americas, and people lump Native American and Filipino in a similar fashion of, oh, you're just this. It's like, let's be more specific of who and what we are.
Well, we were both called Indios, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, it's interesting because I agree with that, because like there's all the parts and differences, and then there's the parts where we can also like find solidarity, right? Like like I heard what's his name, Lakota guy, he's a speaker, but I heard him talking about being indigenous the other day, and he said something about like, I'd rather not be indigenous personally.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, and the reason why is because if we think about what indigenous is just like a term in juxtaposition to colonization.
Yeah.
And he was like, I'd much rather just be Lakota.
Yeah.
Right. And like, that makes sense. And I can appreciate that viewpoint of what being indigenous means. The other viewpoint of indigenous that I really like, though, is the viewpoint of the juxtaposition to, I guess, that in its terms to time, right? And just like being integrated in like reciprocal relationship, not exploitative relationship with a place and time, right? Like in the Philippines, they've found sites now where they're showing humans where they're like butchering rhinos 700,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's a long time to be in a land, right? Like, and I just think about, because I'm also an ecology nerd, that was part of my studies in my biology degree, was like, was really interested in what we call like human ecosystems, right? Because one of the things we see is when we're cut off from our communities and the land is it can feel like we're out of place with the land, almost like it'd be better off without us. You know what I mean? And that's not what I've seen with like indigenous communities, like out here in Washington. One of the most endangered ecosystems is the prairie ecosystem, which used to be very, very prevalent out here. Because a lot of the indigenous people here were burning and maintaining low intensity burning, maintaining these prairie ecosystems. And like one of the best examples I have of this is camas, right? Which was one of the staple foods of the indigenous people right here where I live. And it's this bulb, right? That when you go out with like a digging stick, I have one, hold on. Digging stick, right?
Oh, that's cool.
Right? But it's got like this pointy end and it's on a curve, right?
Okay.
So you in the earth and it kind of loosens the earth so the bulb can just come out.
Oh, okay.
And as a result of that, the earth gets loosened, but it doesn't like flip as if you were digging with a shovel and you're not losing all the topsoil. And it creates these pockets. So when the water comes, it is able to soak into the ground more, and it aerates it so there's more oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
As a result, the camas is able to grow better.
Okay.
Right. So if you look at the camas prairie where indigenous people are harvesting in the traditional way,
Mm-hmm.
healthier and it grows better than when they're not there.
Yeah, because they're not doing the whole like slash and burn and crop rotation that's typical of agrarian societies today. Yeah.
Well, it's not. It's kind of like wouldn't be considered agrarian. Like people would call
I say agrarian, but like the way people farm today, let alone like single crop farming, like say in the Midwest with corn.
Right. Yeah. It's not single crop farming, right? Yeah. It would be what people call hunter gatherer society. Yeah. I really am not a fan of that term because it doesn't do justice to like the actual relationships that are happening in the ecosystem.
I should say with all those, what I was saying before is like it's encounter to those that it's again living with the land versus that style of farming is definitely living with the land versus living on the land, because those styles of farming that I described are very much typical of living on the land and not working with it. I clarify for that.
Yeah. So it's almost like the way I described it is like human beings being an integrated part of the ecosystem health, right? Like if lots of times they describe it like the land has a carrying capacity, and then like human population will rise to that, or whatever population will rise to that, and if it's maintained, then it's fine. And then something could happen, like I don't know, there's less water, and then the carrying capacity will go down, right? But a lot of indigenous people, what they'll do is they're actually like the way they enrich these environments, like the carrying capacity for everything goes up, right? Yeah. So that's one of the ways I like to think about indigeneity is just like that integration in like non-exploitive, long-term relationship, you know.
Yeah, it's the difference between subsistence farming versus profit informed farming, because you're trying to produce for other people so you can generate income versus producing for your local just enough and a little bit more for survivability and sustainability. Because like when we look in the shifting between, again, from subsistence, I can't speak English today, subsistence living, people tend to like go after more, because like up here in Alaska there is this constant dynamic about that with say our hunting and fishing. There's a lot of people who rely on the natural bounty of the land here of a lot of fish and a lot of moose and caribou. But when people go at it from a commercial standpoint, like the bycatch issue is, again, you're fishing for a lot, but there's a lot of wastage versus like I'm going to go dip netting to feed my family for winter, or I'm going to go get a moose for winter, that kind of thing. So there isn't like I'm going to go slaughter a bunch of moose and waste a lot of meat because I'm trying to sell it. I'm trying to do what I need to feed my family. And again, it sounds like it's a similar dynamic as what you're describing.
Yeah. I'm gonna run to the restroom real quick.
Yeah,
and we're about this idea of that we're going here with like sustainable relationships, in terms to like I don't know what you see with the FMA community.
For whomever's watching this, I see there's one person watching on YouTube. I really appreciate you hanging out with me and Itsa today, because I mean Facebook and Instagram is just not functioning for some fucking reason. But anyways, I'm going to edit a lot of this stuff and just post it through Spotify and YouTube, and it'll be better anyways. So I hope everybody's enjoying what we're talking about today. Yes, this is an FMA show. Yes, we talk about Filipino concerns because it's intrinsically tied to that. But there is so much more to FMA or what we do other than just the base level swinging sticks, stabbing people and cutting stuff with swords. There's people involved with it. And as a result of there's people involved with it, there's cultures and institutions that are necessary to discuss, so that the thing that we do, sticks, knives, and swords in Filipino martial arts, isn't just a placeholder with a name with some acknowledgement where it comes from, but we focus so much on the physical skill, but not actually talking about the intellectual, historical aspects of what informed this beautiful, wonderful thing that we call FMA. So this is where I find it important for instructors to, one, obviously teach your craft, be a master of your craft, know and have good modalities of training and pedagogy, all those things as a martial arts instructor. But I also find that it is requisite, if you're going to teach a martial art, especially an indigenous martial art, pay credit and homage to, one, the lineage holders that have taught you this. So credit your instructors, credit your lineage, credit where you got this information from. But just the same, I find it necessary for you to, this is my opinion, the responsibility and accountability is, do your research about the people that make up this and the histories attached to that. So I challenge any instructor, anybody getting into the martial arts, specifically like Filipino martial arts in this case, is do your research and look up your history, particular to what makes up FMA and what informs us to the reasons why it exists. Because modern FMA, if we want to say FMA is the US, that's less than 80 years. And the Philippines itself is less than 100 years old as a national polity. So with that, look at the history, research the history, and as a result of that, teach the history to your students. Because this idea of taking the F out of FMA, fuck that. You need to keep the F in there. You need to talk about the history. You need to talk about the peoples, because if not, it's just violence. So, anyways, Itsa's back on. Let's do this. Hey, so little rant, but anyways.
I caught the end of what you were saying there, and yeah, resonated. I like that.
Yeah, it's just, I get a little upset and passionate about it, because this aspect, for one, it's national pride, it's pride in my ethnicity of, like, if you don't give credit to the name and you tell me to give credit to my instructors, like, you can't eat your cake, you can't have it eat your cake, all that terrible analogy. But point being, you have to do it all. I can't speak English this morning, anyways, but talk about ecosystems.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's I've just noticed this argument, on like certain things on social media where, like, there's definitely some cultural differences between, the older generations, and being like, you should honor your ancestry and like be our group, and then like, then like a lot of the younger generations being like, it's too controlling, and it's we should be able to train with whoever we want, and like, and I think there's validity to all of that, personally. But I think there is like these differences of like the whole ecosystem around things, and then you've got trauma mixed in there and all the rest. Yeah, for me, I like what you're saying, just like paying tribute, acknowledging where things come from, and for me, like, I just think like, man, I just really, I really appreciate people who come in and have this sense of like, wanting to help, to build things up, like I got in the community because like it was making me feel good, right? And like connected, and I wanted that as a part of me and everything. And just like here, I'm hearing you say with like what you're going on your journey is like, you have this vision of like, hey, I'm invested in like this work because yes, it makes me feel good, and like I'm wanting to study. It's like, but also there's this greater vision that's like bigger than me that I'm also investing into, that's like helping out all of our communities and like humanity as a whole, like getting past some of this trauma so we can not have to go through all the hardships I did.
Yeah, it's the whole like get past the great death.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, I appreciate people who come in and like, you know, come into, you know, our martial arts community, for example, bringing it back there and just are like, you know, yes, come here for yourself, take something of it. Like, we are abundant, our community is strong, like we're happy to give it to you. We enjoy you coming in and come and getting violent with us, right? Like, that's all right, you know. And I just really appreciate those who are like, get that, and then they're like, I want this for people who are bigger than me, and I want to help, you know.
I mean, the responsibility of any person who possesses knowledge is to share it, because like as much as knowledge is power, it also is a source of control and tyranny. Because if I'm in control of the information and I don't share it with you, and it could be to the benefit of you and the community, that sense of that privilege and ownership says that I have the power and I know I'm in the know, and you're all lesser because you don't know. And that is incredibly arrogant, and has been typical of a lot of the gatekeeping personalities within whatever intellectual community and circle of like, there's the people who know, and then there's people who don't know. And people want to control the things. Again, it's going back to the truths, conspiracies, etc. It is that issue of information is power, knowledge is power. So we find power or empowerment by sharing it with the rest of the community, so we can uplift and become a better better with each generation. Because as an instructor, your job is to present information and to convey it. And if you have knowledge, you should share it freely. I mean, yes, pay your instructor for the time. You're not paying the instructor for their knowledge. You're paying from their time, their expertise, their willingness to, again, it's time is what you're paying for, is the currency, rather than just the information. So again, as a culture bearer, as a lineage bearer, as an information individual, share it instead of holding on to it and holding it as a point of power, because I mean, that's so arrogant.
Yes, I think yeah, you know, I mean, I feel like most of that, and I'll say like there's definitely caution in like people that I personally have a lot of reservations around sharing stuff with.
Yeah.
You know, like, I don't know, if people give me vibes that they're have an exploitive type of personality and have no qualms with that in their moral compass.
Yeah, I agree with this. Yes.
Well,
but if you're in the academic space, we'll say like if you're already a student, you're already a participant in this space, in this subject matter, one, you should be hungry to go after that information and be excited and give credit to all those things. But if also is the dynamic of an instructor, you should also be willing to share that information, because the overall, like, it comes to this issue about the master student syndrome, where a master wants to keep the student in that dynamic for fear of them surpassing them and being better than them. It's like, you want them to be better than you, because that's how the art progresses. So, and it's not a competition of like, I'm going to beat you as the new student. It's like, no, like, share the information, because that's how the system grows. That's how the culture expands. If you're already in that intellectual space, share. Not just saying share freely to like whomever and whatever, because that, again, I agree with you, that has a certain level of connotation of potential misuse of said information. But if you're already in a student teacher dynamic, share it. I mean, might as well.
No, I think I get where you're going with that. Yeah, because like in the end, it's like where you're going, I think, is like we shouldn't be exploiting our students, right? And just like I don't know, being afraid of them like surpassing us, because like, yeah, like I've had students come in who are better than me in so many ways, like intellectually, right? Like I have a student who just like come in and had this like amazing drill that they came up with out of their mind. They're like, look, I created this thing. I was like,
cool.
That's way cooler than anything I've come up with. Like, let's use it, right? And, and I feel like, you know, that's that reciprocity I'm talking about, right? Is like, if people have that kind of energy where they're coming and the goal is to like make each other better, I'm all about it. I'm gonna give you everything. right? Because if you get better than me, you're going to help me be better.
Yeah, it's that Kapwa mentality. You show up with a plate and a dish, and then you come home with a plate and a dish, versus showing up to the gathering with nothing and expecting everything to come home with you. Like, that's incredibly privileged and arrogant. So yeah, sure, share the stuff, do the Kapwa. Yeah,
Make me think food now.
it's not a proper FMA conversation when we don't talk about food. I mean, honestly, that is one of that I find is actually the best part of our gatherings. As much as I love the camp and doing the physical aspect, it's the sharing the meal and the memories afterwards is what I find the best part of coming down for West Coast camp. And just like any martial arts thing, is actually sitting around the table and actually talking, because that's actually where all the like really cool information and knowledge and truth comes out, is when people sit there and just talk with you, and that camaraderie of we're eating, because eating is a very vulnerable thing as well as an activity, because you get to see all their habits, behaviors, and how they handle food.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's got to eat. So, and this is where, again, information is shared so freely in a lot of ways because of the dinner conversations, and it's also very vulnerable. So yeah, I love the touching hands, but I also love sharing the meal, but more importantly, I like the meal better. So
yeah, I feel that. Yeah, we just had our mini camp over the weekend. Yeah. We do that a couple times a year. And yeah, they just keep stepping it up with the food every year, man. It was all of that. I like getting in there with my hands. Mm-hmm. Extra texture to the meals is nice.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Have you been to Bobby's World Camp yet?
No, I've been trying to make that happen. I know we're doing World Camp in the Philippines in 2025. I am financially preparing to make that happen. So it'll actually be my first time back to the Philippines since 1989. And I get to spend my 40th birthday there in the Philippines. So that'll also be fun.
I think that was probably around my last time in the Philippines. Pretty close. I think we're the same age. 38?
Yeah, 39.
39? Okay, yeah, I'm 38.
Give or take a few months. So
yeah. So yeah. So it'll be good if we both manage to save the money. It'll be a good experience for both of us. Yeah.
Take out a second mortgage to fly all of us there for a month. Yeah, because like the other aspect is when I go back to the Philippines, we're also going to do the adoption story process, because we're going to go back to sites that I kind of remember in my youth living there, but like trying to figure out like names of places, because again, reconnecting to the land, reconnecting to the people, reconnecting to those energies, I find is, again, it's gonna be very healing for me. I feel like it will be, and then that reconnection also my children to understand like this is where dad came from, because my kids have a really strong sense of self and culture with my wife's side of the family, because there's like 4 generations here in our little town of Homer, and there's clear definition of this is the Steiner side of the family. You know what it is to be a Steiner.
Yeah.
The Leffler side of the family, that's a messy thing, because it is my name by given, but it's not truly mine. So going back to mine and my people and reconnection there will, for me and for my own healing and for my kids understanding, like this is who we are, this is where we come from, and so it's I'm really looking forward to it. I'm a little anxious and hesitant to it, because again, it's the whole aspect of I'm traveling with my kids and my wife, going back to the Philippines. There's also that emotional weight of just being there. Plus, I don't like the heat, so I mean, there's that as well. So,
yeah.
But yeah, we're intending to be there for like 3 weeks. So, because we're gonna go, because I mean, if we're gonna be there, we might as well be there.
Yeah, totally feel the same way. Yeah. So you're gonna try to bring the whole family out with you when you go.
Yeah. Yep. Because we're also going to try to dovetail that with going to Japan and Korea if we can make it work. Because I mean, I spent a lot of time. I was stationed in Korea. I love that place. I want to go back. So,
yeah. I've never been to that side of the world much. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I've been to the Philippines, but it was a very long time ago. Beyond that, most of my travels have just been through, United States, Mexico, a little bit into Canada. But, yeah. Yeah, but you know, World Camps always been a great time. Like you were talking about, like my last time to World Camp was right before COVID happened, and I made the mistake of like going in with my friends on an Airbnb.
Oh no.
Yeah, because I was like, you know, we're gonna be there for a couple of days. Let's just get an Airbnb together. It'll be fun, you know. And then like I found out where the real party's at is like at the hotel.
Yeah. Yeah.
After you've trained all day, they got a whole room rented out where everyone just stays up,
It
super
hangs out. Yeah.
playing out, and you know, yeah, and like you're saying, that's where the magic happens, right? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah. So, you know, I'm anticipating something similar to in the Philippines. Just keeping my eye out for like, okay, where is everyone going to be staying at, and just trying.
Yeah. I mean, the other aspect for traveling like that, which is great if you're doing international travel with because I mean, people recommend for international travel is travel with a group. It's safer. You have a support system and all that. So traveling with a group with World Camp, I mean, we have a lot of local connection that can help us on the ground with uh, a lot of the tourism issues, a lot of like understanding where people have been there before. So there's a lot of that experience. Plus, you're going with a community, so you're running with that. You have a lot of like logistical support and physical support in case there's an issue. Because I mean, we're moving as a community, so yeah, that I'm looking forward to that aspect of we're just here, everybody doing the thing. Because I mean, it's like a big family gathering. Honestly, it's a
Yeah,
big travel gathering.
absolutely. Yep. Yeah, and you know, that's for me. That's definitely like one of the things. One of my personal goals down there is to just like make more family. You know,
Yeah.
use the area. Maybe go back later with my immediate family, but
Yeah.
want grounded in the area for myself first. And
Yeah, absolutely. Because the plan, if I wasn't going to go to World Camp, because there was questions if we couldn't make it happen, is I was going to go to West Coast Camp, but bring my son down with me because he's been training a lot with me here recently, and so it'll be a dad and son adventure, and then eventually be the whole family coming down. But I don't know if I'm going to be able to make West Coast Camp this year if I'm paying for World Camp in a couple months later. So because like what I'm finding also with this show is I get invited to a bunch of things all over the place. And it's like, I need more air miles. So I mean, I would love to go do the things. It's just I need to be able to pay for it to get there, and also pay for the time for my going back and forth with my wife because she also works. So it's like I can't just travel and leave her. So ideally, I can bring her with me, but
if you're
and our
out there,
kids with us.
pay his way.
Yeah, exactly. This podcast has got to do something. So I'm happy to do an interview on site if you guys will pay for my airline ticket. Oh,
Well, I think I'm gonna start checking out. I gotta get some things together and go do some work here in a little bit.
yeah, brother. I mean, we're coming up on 2 hours. I really appreciate you hanging out with me. Do you have anything that you want to close out with? Anything coming up that you want to promote? If Instagram's working, I'll throw your Instagram back up there. There were some issues with Instagram here recently.
Not a whole lot. I mean, maybe a short story. I don't
Yeah,
know. I always like.
yeah.
I'm a storyteller, you know. I love those, and so I'll just say, you know, like, because like one of the things that someone told me is like, you know, when we think about like we're all storytellers, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
there's old stories of like long time ago that people would call like myths.
Mm-hmm.
One of the guys out here is like, we don't call those myths, we call those teachings, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody gets their own thing out of it. And so I just kind of like was hearing this science story the other day, and it's starting to get into my bones a little bit. So I think it feels a little relevant to what we were talking about.
Yeah.
And it starts that like a long time ago, there was all these crabs, and this crab was waking up, and he's like, man, those waves, they're always singing so loud, I can't sleep. And goes to the other crabs, and he's like, those waves, they're so loud out there, we can't sleep, what should we do? And they said, well, I think we should make war. And he said, so they all talked amongst themselves, and they decided they were going to go to war with the waves. And they got together, and they all started going out there, and they were walking out to the beach. And on the way, the shrimp saw them, and the shrimp was like, hey, where y'all going? He said, well, we're going to make war on the waves. It's so loud we can't sleep. And the shrimp said, I don't think you should do that. You're going to lose. It's like the waves are so powerful. And look at your legs. They're so weak. Your whole body's bending over almost to the ground. And he started laughing at him, and the crabs got all mad. So they started pinching him and be like, you're coming to war with us. And until, the shrimp was like, okay, I'll go. And they took the shrimp with them. And they were getting over to the beach, and they looked at the shrimp. They said, where's your weapon? I'm going to war. And he said, it's right here. And he showed the sword on his face. And they were like, oh, okay. And then right then there was a big wave coming. And the shrimp started to run away. So all the crabs didn't see the wave because they were watching that shrimp. And the wave crashed over the crabs, and they all died. And so that was all the male crabs that went out, right? And then the females, they were starting to wonder what happened, and they were getting worried, and they're like, we have to go help. We have to go to war too. So they got up and they went out there, and they went out to the beach, and then another wave crashed, and they all died also. And then all the shrimp, they went over there where all the baby crabs were starting to come out from their shelter, and they told the baby crabs about what happened. So now when you go out to those beaches over there, and you see those little crabs, and they're in between. They don't live out in the land where their ancestors used to, and they don't live down in the ocean where most of the crabs live now. They're just right in between, and they're always going and running and trying to make war on those waves, and then they get scared and they run back. And that's it. That's the whole story.
That's awesome. That's beautiful, brother. And what a way to end this podcast. I appreciate you. Much love for you. And yeah, may you have an awesome day, bro.
All right, too. Take care.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I'm not going to say much after that, because how do you follow a story like that? So anyways, that was awesome. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with me. Thank you, everybody, hanging out with Guru Itsa. He is one of those beautiful humans that I've met in this community, and I'm glad to share his story, or have the opportunity for him to share his story. So no promos, no nothing. Have an awesome day. I'm going to hit the button, and yeah, hope you enjoyed and hope you got something out of this today. Have an awesome day.